Hi, and welcome back to Ronnie the Reader. We're doing another video here, and this is going to be my January wrap-up. So I have talked about most of these books already in shorts, so definitely feel free to check out the shorts if you want kind of quicker, snappier reviews, but today I'm going to be going over a little bit more of the synopsis of each book and kind of what I thought of it while I was reading and, just giving you a quick wrap-up of things. And yeah, so this is the first video first full video, I guess, that I'm recording back in the state of Maryland after completing a move. So I'm excited, but even though I had a lot going on in the month of December, which I didn't read really anything, I think maybe one or two books. But January has been a really good reading month for me. I finished 7 books, and I had really high ratings for most of them. So I'm really happy with my reading month overall. I think my average score for month was like a 4.3 rating, so really, really good. The first book that I finished for the entire year was a pretty new purchase for me, and that is The Memory Police by Yoko Agawa. This is originally a Japanese published novel that was published, I think, in the 90s, and it's a kind of sci-fi dystopian set world where we follow a main character, a woman who is living on an island seemingly off the coast of Japan, where essentially things disappear. And then everyone is meant to forget those things, and there is a memory police that comes and does raids of people's homes and businesses and things to make sure that they have actually forgotten these things. The novel is a lot different than what I actually thought it was going to be. So essentially, this book is a more slow, thought-provoking kind of character look at this woman, and you get some world building, but ultimately there's no real explanation or reasoning given to why this is happening, and things don't essentially disappear. The way it's described in the book is our main character wakes up and she can feel that something has been forgotten, and then slowly throughout the day everyone kind of realizes what is forgotten and then is told and proceeded to get rid of those things, and then they are essentially wiped from existence, and people essentially are supposed to forget about them after they've stopped being used. And at first it's kind of minimal things, like birds go missing, and then there's household products, and we get a prologue of the main character and her mother, who was a sculptor and an artist who has saved forgotten things. And so we do learn that not everyone forgets these things that are supposed to be forgotten. And the memory police are a really kind of dictatorship almost. It's a very oppressive society where people obviously don't have freedom of choice. And the novel ultimately asks how far would you go to essentially conform, and what would you do for others to help them? And really, I personally, I don't know if others, because I didn't read any reviews or anything, but this felt like such a reflection or critique, not even critique, but really what it felt like reading it was that it was supposed to be mirroring Nazi Germany and the prosecution of the Jewish people and other populations within Germany and all of Europe during that time. And so it was just really fascinating. It was really, really sad at a lot of parts. It's just a sad novel ultimately, and the ending is quite sad, but ultimately it's written really well. The writing in here is really pretty, and I'm normally not someone for writing in prose and being really engrossed in just the way the sentences are constructed, but this and another novel that I read later on in the month, I think, do it really well. And I think that's a good work of both the author and then the translator of this book as well. So ultimately, this was a 5 out of 5 stars for me. I absolutely loved it. I do believe that this author does have other works. I'm not sure if any of them have been published in English so far. I think they have, because in the first page here we have other works by this author, and then they are in English titles. So I think other work has been translated. So I definitely would be on the lookout for that and see how others view them and kind of what their thoughts are. But this was an amazing start to the year, and I'm so happy that I Alright, the second book that I finished, and a majority of the books that I finished I actually got from the library, but I've now had to return them. So I don't have them physically, but most of these I did read physically in some sort of combination with listening to bits and pieces as an audiobook. But the second book is None of This Is True by Lisa Jewell. This was Lisa Jewell's release, I think in 2023. It might have come out in 2024. No, I think it was 2023. But essentially you are following two women, and one of those women has a podcast, and the other woman kind of runs into her because they find out that they are birthday twins. The second woman kind of cons the first woman into making her the subject of her podcast. It's a podcast of like women who've done extraordinary things, but the pitch is like I'm in the midst of like doing something extraordinary. And ultimately this book is just really readable and fun and twisty. Like it has one of those things where almost every chapter kind of ends on like a little mini cliffhanger, and you are just excited to see what happens next. And it's told in like dueling point of views where you're jumping back and forth and you don't know what is true and what is a lie, and ultimately it's just super twisty and super good. And so I gave this one 5 out of 5 stars, and this book is really hyped up. I've seen it a lot on TikTok back when that still existed. Well, I guess it still exists, but I did get rid of my TikTok. Instagram, I've seen this a lot of places, a lot of places, and I definitely think it holds up and makes for a really twisty thriller. I think this is Lisa Jewell's best work so far. I have read by Lisa Jewell, The Family Upstairs, The Night She Disappeared, and Then She Was Gone, and I gave all of those pretty high ratings. The Family Upstairs was a 3-star, but Night She Disappeared was 4-star, and Then She Was Gone was a 5-star for me. So definitely slowly making my way through Lisa Jewell's. Like I said, think that this is her best so far, and I've seen this one just recommended a ton, and I think a lot of people like it, and the majority of the reviews, even if they aren't 5 stars, are pretty positive on just the readability and fun like level of this and the interesting twists that the characters take. I won't say that it's super shocking to where you're like never going to guess what's going on, but just the way that these characters devolve and the things that people will do to kind of create this life for themselves and essentially make themselves into the victim. I think that's ultimately what this book is really kind of talking about, is just kind of women and motherhood and like who is a victim, what makes a victim, is there any such thing as like a perfect victim, and who truly is lying, essentially, like whose story is true. Like you sometimes will never know. And so I just really enjoyed this one and really happy that I read it. The book that I finished for the month was One Perfect Couple by Ruth Ware. This was a Ruth Ware release that came out in 2024. And it is following a couple who goes on to a game show, like a reality dating show called One Perfect Couple. But really this book turns into more of a disaster thriller. So it's pretty different of a vibe from Ruth Ware's other books that she's written. It's much less straight of like a domestic psychological thriller. It has more of that disaster element in it, and I really enjoyed it. It kind of reminded me, I've said this in my short review, not in any sort of plot way, but just like in vibe way, like a little bit of Lost, I guess you could say. If you read, well, I read back when I was in middle school, I read the Island series by, oh my god, I can't even remember who it's by, but I'll flash a quick picture of like the covers up. It really reminded me of The Island by whoever that was. And so I just really thought that that piece was fun, but ultimately it was a 3.5 star for me. In my own personal ratings, I gave it 3.5, but on all like platforms like Goodreads and things, I gave it a 3-star. I guess Goodreads is the only place that I gave it 3 stars, but the characters and like the characterization was a little not there for me. It felt like people just kind of changed personalities to kind of fit where they needed to be in the story at that particular point. Not that that was necessarily like the natural flow of things. And then also I think the reality show conceit was just not needed, in my opinion. It didn't add anything other than kind of extra stakes for why our characters were there and how they were brought together. So I just don't think it was needed. And then some of the reactions to what some of the people thought of what they needed to do because they were on a reality show, like giving up their phones and doing all that stuff, like I don't know, it read a little unrealistic. I will say that this, I think, because it was such a different vibe for Ruth Ware, I'm really interested to see her go more in this direction. I think it could be a new, interesting twist for her thrillers that have been really disappointing for me in the last couple of years. I really enjoyed The Death of Mrs. Westaway and The Turn of the Key, but really didn't like One by One, which is, I think, her most comparable work to One Perfect Couple. And then I DNF'd The It Girl and gave 0 Days 2 stars and don't even remember anything that happened in that book because it was just so annoying, in my opinion, and boring. So definitely glad to see that this was a little bit of a bounce back for Ruth Ware and hoping that she kind of trends in this newer type of direction. I will say she always comes up with interesting ideas, at least her last couple of novels, but the execution is not always there for me with Ruth Ware. All right, next book up to talk about is Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. And I gave this book a 4 out of 5 stars. And Emily St. John Mandel, I've read now Sea of Tranquility and Station 11, and I just love the way she structures stories. I really loved the structure and kind of the flashing back and forth narrative of Station 11 and Sea of Tranquility as well. Like, her stories are not told in obviously chronological order. I will say with Station 11, I gave it 4 stars because I found the first half of it to be a little slow. I much more enjoyed the back half story and just the story of the kind of pre-pandemic, because this is a post-apocalyptic thriller, not even thriller, but post-apocalyptic story where a flu has wiped out the majority of the human population. And obviously this hits a little bit different now after COVID, but it's, was written in 2014, so it came out obviously a couple of years before that happened. But I think the pre-pandemic storyline was really interesting, and then those first couple of days and first couple of years really of like the society collapsing, I find to be the most interesting in these types of stories. So that's really what I gravitated to in this novel. And so the bulk of the story is following like a traveling symphony, and it's like 15 or 20 years or something later. So that to me just isn't as interesting as a time period, and I didn't find those characters to be as interesting. Now, I will say they are strong written characters, and I was rooting for them and was hoping that they would succeed, but it just ultimately, like, I would have liked the story to focus on other things more. But this still was really good. 4 out of 5 stars, obviously, and it's definitely a book that I think I could reread. And if I ever did reread it, and knowing kind of the structure and how much time we're spending with characters, I think this could jump up to a 5 out of 5 star for me. I think in a couple of years I will reread this, but who knows? All right, next up we have The Writing Retreat by Julia Bartz. This is another mystery thriller that I read, and it follows a main character who wins a prestigious spot on this writing retreat with her favorite author, and then things kind of just go downhill. And I will say that this book really reminded me a lot at first of Plain Bad Heroines. It has a lot of the same themes of kind of writing, literature. It's kind of got a sapphic, like lesbian energy to it, which just kind of queer in general, which was interesting. And I think the first half of the book and the character dynamics as they're set up are so interesting and so good. But then the second half just is a little bit disappointing and goes in just more of your classic mystery thriller direction. So I gave this one 4 out of 5 stars. Not my favorite, but also good. I think the character dynamics, like I said, were really interesting to read about. So I definitely will be checking out other Julia Bartz novels that she comes out with. And I just hope that that mystery thriller piece, she can kind of step up a little bit, a tiny bit. Not that it was bad. Like I said, the twists in this, they were pretty, I would say, obvious, but it was just a fun story to read from, and the character dynamics of it were good. But yeah, I don't have much more to say on this one, so it was just kind of a 4 out of 5 star for me. Right, the next book that I read is in contention with my favorite book for the month and one of my really favorite books of all time, possibly. It's another 5 out of 5 stars, and it is Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. This book I have kind of been wanting to read for a long time. It's been on my radar for a long time. Previously, R.F. Kuang obviously came out with the Poppy War trilogy, which I was really interested in, but it just always kind of seemed a little bit intimidating. So when she kind of came out with this standalone, more contemporary literary fiction novel, I was interested in reading it, and I finally did, and I really understand why everyone loves this book so much. You are following a main character named June, who is one of the most like narcissistic, worst characters that I've ever read from. But it is so fascinating being in June's head and seeing the hoops she jumps through to make herself into the hero of her own story. And aren't we all the hero of our own stories? You don't know, this book follows June as she steals her friend Athena's manuscript. Athena is an Asian American woman, and she writes a story about Chinese laborers who were used in World War One. So it's a very Chinese centered story, and June, being a white woman, essentially steals this story and passes it off as her own, and like she's an ally. And this book talks a lot about the need of like own voices stories that was kind of became a popular talking point a couple of years ago, and kind of what people who are trying to write about things like not necessarily related to them, like what can they do to be as inclusive as possible and to still tell these stories well, and should they even be the ones to tell these stories? What does it mean to include an Asian character or a Black character or anything when you are fully a white person? And it's just really fascinating. And June as a character, while I think most of us are not her, I think all of us have aspects of June in us in some sort of ways, that desire to be famous in some sort of way. Not necessarily famous, but just, get acclaim. Like June Sen says at the end of this book, like, what am I going to leave for this world? Like, what is going to be my ultimate legacy? And so that is a really interesting part of this novel that I think just makes for an interesting story. So ultimately, this was a 5 out of 5 stars and just absolutely beautifully written. This is the other novel that I was referencing that just the prose and the way that it was written just flowed so well. And not that this had any sort of like flowery or imaginative writing, just the way that the story was constructed and told was just such a pleasure and easy read to complete. Like, R.F. Kuang is such a good writer. I'm so happy that I read this, and I think this probably was the push that I needed to finally jump into the Poppy War trilogy. I don't know if that's going to happen this year, but it's definitely something that I would like to do. And her next book, what is it called again? Maybe Catabus or something of that nature. I think it's supposed to come out this year, and I think it's more along the lines of like a contemporary literary fiction, but I definitely would be interested in checking that one out and seeing what the deal with that is. But yes, so happy to have read this because I absolutely loved it. All right, so the last book that I read for the month, I was a little hesitant to kind of talk about just because of the controversy surrounding the book and more particularly the author. And so it was Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, obviously by J.K. Rowling. I have read Harry Potter twice before. I read it once when I was in high school, and then I listened to the audiobooks in 2019, I think. I wanted to reread Harry Potter from more of a critical lens at this point, and I can understand why people think that maybe I shouldn't. And I totally get that, and I'm really kind of struggling with if I want to do that or not. Well, I'm more struggling with, I want to read this book more from a critical lens, in the series from a critical lens as an adult, and really kind of look at it. So normally the last two times that I've read this, it just was purely because I loved Harry Potter growing up as the movies, and I just gave the books 5 out of 5 stars because I love them. But this book, when I read it from more of that critical perspective, I ultimately settled on a 4-star rating for it this time. And that's for a couple of reasons. One, I think you can see the seeds of a good story here. I think the setup is done well. I think the setup for the series is done well. However, some of my issues are just like little things that I think should have been caught that aren't like the best writing, and maybe, you know, when you are 10 you're not going to notice, but like one example that caught me is Harry at one point is talking about backing out of the match with Slytherin after he finds out that Snape is refereeing his match with Hufflepuff, and you know, he's like, well, we don't have a reserve seeker. And then later on, at the end of the book, obviously we all know that he goes through the trials to get the Sorcerer's Stone and he ends up in the hospital wing. And when he wakes up, he mentions that, oh, you know, they were able to play, like Gryffindor was still able to play their Quidditch match. And I don't even remember at this point. I've read this book 3 times and I've seen the movie so many times. Don't even remember if they won or lost. I think they won. I don't know. But I'm like, who was the seeker? Because Harry said not probably 50 pages before that we don't have a reserve. So it's just like little things like that that are like slightly inconsistent. And I think you can really tell that some of the things set up in this book were the inspiration for plot points later on and things that happen later on, and not the other way around that J.K. Rowling tries to spin it to where she says that she knew the whole story from the very beginning, which we just know fundamentally is not true. I think she probably mapped out the first 3 or maybe even 4 books pretty well and maybe had an idea of what like the ending would be for year 7 for the Deathly Hallows and for that kind of confrontation at the end. But we just simply know, because of the plot holes that do get exposed later on in the series, that I do want to read through and kind of see for myself. Like, I really want to critically analyze Harry Potter as a piece of literature fiction. And if people don't want me to talk about that and just want me to do it on my own time, I'm more than happy to not talk about this book if it's going to make people uncomfortable. Then this can be something that I just do in my free time as my own project and I don't mention. I have already decided that I'm not going to be posting like Harry Potter reviews on my Instagram. I am including them in my monthly wrap up. So essentially what I'll be doing is posting my story, like to my story at the end of each month, like just a quick 1 pager or 2 pages, depending on how many books I read, maybe even 3 if we're being ambitious, of the book, and then just the star rating. So I did include Harry Potter in that, but my actual Instagram post I did not. So please, if you have thoughts, like let me know on how you think is best to proceed, because the last thing I want to do is like offend anyone and you know, make anyone uncomfortable. And I understand that people think that we shouldn't be reading Harry Potter or anything like that, and I get that. I definitely do, and I definitely don't support, you know, J.K. Rowling or anything that she says, but I've had these books for a couple of years and I have wanted to just do a critical reread lens. So if you have thoughts, definitely let me know. But ultimately, this was a 4-star read this time around, reading it in my life. And I will be moving forward. I don't know at what point. I don't think it will be in February. I think I kind of want to do a month on, month off of Harry Potter, but I will want to move on to Chamber of Secrets later on. So yeah, but that is everything that I read in the month of January for this year. So please let me know what you thought of any of the books that I've mentioned below. If you've read any of them, what your ratings, thoughts, comments, concerns were. Definitely don't forget to like and subscribe if you would be so kind, and definitely follow my Instagram. I'm a lot more active, like daily almost, on Instagram. So if you want to kind of keep up with my reading in real time and interact with me in real time, feel free to follow that. Once again, it is at Ronnie_the_reader. So, and it's always linked below as well. So thanks so much once again, and I will talk to you in my next video soon.